Hello and welcome into the KE Report. I'm your host, Shad Markwitz, and today we're getting an update on Emerita Resources. Emerita is traded on the TSX.V under the ticker EMO and on the OTCQB under the ticker EMOTF. And I'm joined today with the CEO and Chairman of Emerita Resources, David Gower. And David, always great to get you on the show to get an update. This is a big one today, and it's great to get you on to discuss the update to your mineral resource really across all three projects at the Iberian West Project, all three deposits. So you've got a total indicated resource here of 18.96 million tons, grading 2.88% zinc, 1.42% lead, 0.5% copper, 66 grams per ton silver, 1.28 grams per ton gold, and a total inferred 6.8 million tons, grading 3.25% zinc, 1.5% lead, 0.73% copper, 56 grams per ton silver, and 0.77 grams per ton gold. So this is a big change between 2023 from a big picture standpoint. Contrast this resource to the one that you put out 2 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. It's a vast improvement on a number of fronts, Chad. First of all, the one that we put out 2 years ago, we didn't have any metallurgical data. So La Romanera at that time, which was the only gold-rich part of the system that we had, is very gold-rich, and that's unusual in this belt. There aren't other deposits with that characteristic. So when the QPs did that resource, they didn't have anything they could benchmark it against and only gave us 20% credit for the gold recoveries. So one of the big improvements that we've achieved through the interim is actually doing the metallurgy for these deposits and demonstrated a 64.3% gold recovery. And we actually expect that will increase in our next iteration. We're continuing to optimize that. So it's very exciting. These deposits collectively host more or less 800,000, 900,000, almost a million ounces of gold, actually, in all categories. So to have a resource where you're only talking about taking 20% of that kind of value, it really was important for us to get that metallurgy figured out. And that will have a major effect on the resource. So the new resource that we put out, as you pointed out, it will be the foundation for a pre-feasibility study. We believe we can skip the PEA stage because we have more than 75% indicated resources. And so we won't really have to include much in the way of, if any, inferred resources for the engineering study that we do. It'll be a very good quality, full economic analysis of a high quality resource. The reason we can have that, of course, is our deposits all come to surface and they're not that deep. So even Romanera, which is the largest, we've only drilled it down to about 680 meters or something like that from surface. Infanta, we've really, what's in the resource is down to about 130 or 140 meters, and everything in Cura is above 350 meters at this point. So this will be perhaps the second last iteration, I would say. We still have 4 drills running on Cura and expanding it. It's still open. All deposits are open, but Cura particularly is the last one we were drilling. So we see a lot of potential to expand that yet at very shallow depths. And its location is such that it will have a profound impact on the development plan. So we really want to optimize that. It's an interesting deposit. If I was going to characterize the 3 deposits, La Romanera is by far the largest and has a very good gold credit. And particularly, the entire deposit is not gold rich. So where the gold occurs, it's actually higher grade than the averages that you see here. La Infanta is the highest grade, even though it's shallow and not very large at this stage. But you can see in the table grades of 7.4% zinc, 4.3% lead, over 1% copper, and 95 grams per ton silver at Infanta. So it's a very high grade. And because it's high grade and has almost no pyrite in it, it's the easiest one from a metallurgical perspective. Cura, which is the latest one, is much more of a simpler copper gold system, which is fine with us. But you, again, will see somewhat lower grades of zinc and lead and very decent copper and gold grades with more than an ounce of silver.
Well, David, let's dig into Cura a little bit more. This is interesting because it's really the new kid on the block. and it's in between the other two deposits. And to the point you just made, it also has gold like La Romanera. So on the metallurgical work, we've discussed this a little bit in the past, but just walk us through, would you process that in a similar way to La Romanera?
Yeah, sure. It looks to us, based on the metallurgical work that we've done on Cura to date, that it will have a similar process that we saw at La Romanera to maximize the gold recoveries. So, yeah, that's clear. The base metal recoveries at Cura seem to be a bit simpler. It's a bit coarser grain than La Romanera. So we're actually getting better con grades and better recoveries there than La Romanera generally. In terms of value, right now with this resource, with a 64% more or less gold recovery, the gold plus silver is approximately equal in value to the zinc plus lead. If we are successful in continuing to improve the precious metal recoveries, of course, this resource will become actually more of a precious metal deposit almost. We feel we can get the recoveries up over 85% for gold, for example, based on some of the preliminary work that we're seeing. So at that point, we can probably report it as a gold equivalent. You'll notice in the table, we provide the zinc equivalent because it's very difficult to model 5 metals, even with massive computing power. So it's based on the recoveries from the metallurgical work, and you come up with factors that allow you to value each of the other commodities in terms of lead. And then just because people have asked for it, we've also added a copper equivalent column, even though it's not really a copper deposit. But the purposes of that is it allows people to easily convert the metal to dollars if they want to try to figure out what's the value of this. So a 3% copper equivalent more or less means there's 60 pounds of copper per ton. You take the copper price that you want, and then you can figure a value per ton and benchmark it against what the costs are, for example, per ton for mining in the area from the existing producers. So it's just really to provide people a way to easily and accurately come up with some ballpark figures around what the margins could be on a deposit like this. And with those numbers, they're exceptionally good in my view. So we're pretty ecstatic with the results of this today.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because I saw the copper equivalent in there as well as the zinc that's been traditionally there, and then obviously the precious metals component. And I was even going to ask you, what kind of deposit is this? Because it's polymetallic, obviously, is it a zinc forward? Is it a precious metals forward? Is it, copper forward? Because you have those different options there. But it sounds like there's still a pretty important zinc component to it. But if you can increase the recoveries of the precious metals, and as you continue to drill, like you mentioned, there's 4 rigs at Cura. If you keep finding more and more gold and silver, it really could be leaning more towards an overall precious metals project. So appreciate you putting some color around that. Also talk about the development scenario where, because Cura is here in the mix now and you're continuing to grow it, how it helps with the development from one deposit type to the other.
Yeah, sure. So the project, the property that we've applied for the mining lease on is about 8 kilometers in an east-west orientation. Infanta is on the east side. La Romanera is on the west side. They're about 6 kilometers apart, more or less. Cura is about halfway in between. The land use designations in Spain are predetermined, and the east side of the project has the best land use designation for industrial development that you can have. So we've made a decision to put all of the infrastructure in that area. It's easier to permit, and there are no restrictions, government restrictions with respect to industrial development of any kind, basically, as long as you follow, obviously, the environmental rules, etc. By doing that, we've chosen to put a ramp basically from the east side of the property all the way to Romanera, which is somewhere in the 4.5 to 5 kilometer range. And that ramp will be a long, straight haulage ramp that will run right by Cura. So Cura will be very low cost to develop because the ramp is going by it anyway. And the other important thing with Cura then, because we'll have access to it much earlier, it provides potential for early cash flow while we're building the big mine at Romanera. The concept of putting in a 5 kilometer ramp doesn't actually add any more meterage to the ramping we would have to do if we went over to Romanera and did a traditional spiral ramp. You still need about 1.5 kilometers for every 100 meters of vertical haulage. So, in fact, even with the long straight ramp, we'll come in about 2/3 of the way down Romanera. We still will do some spirals at the bottom to get to the bottom of it. What it does, though, is allows a much easier automation of the haulage because you don't have to navigate a constantly winding tramway. So that's one of the more important or strategic reasons that we really want to focus on Cura. Plus the fact it's copper gold and the grades are good and the metallurgy is good. It's just a really nice addition to the project. The area where we've been drilling and trying to put the tonnage together, we're seeing sort of 6 up to 14 meter thicknesses. And so we feel we can put a nice little few million ton nugget together, hopefully in that area. That will be just a really nice addition to the project.
How much more drilling is slated for Cura, and when do you think those results will be coming out to the market?
We'll issue drill results, on a kind of a normal schedule as we get assays. Probably not hole by hole, but we have 2 or 3 together. We'll put them out. We are going to target PFS starting next month, and while that's ongoing, so that'll be based on this resource, but we'll be able to update it with a minor revision by adding any new tonnage at Cura, plus any modifications to the metallurgy that we can come up with. They won't be major modifications, primarily focused on the precious metals. So we'll be able to, before that's finalized, those things aren't going to change, where the mill's going, where the tailings go, where the ramp goes, etc. So all of those things can be going on concurrently right now. And that's really the plan. The other big catalyst we're looking at, of course, is getting environmental authorization, which we anticipate in the coming few weeks. Knock on wood. We don't control the timing of that, obviously, but the indications are from the Environment Department that they're pretty well satisfied with what's been submitted. That will lead to the 45-day public consultation period, following which the government, with our input, will reply to any concerns or other issues raised by that process. And after that, it's turned over to the Mines Department to do the consideration for the mining license. So everything is sort of moving towards having that later this year.
All right. And then on the PFS that you say is coming out imminently, as you say, you can kind of jump over the PEA stage because of how many ounces and pounds are already in the indicated category, and you've done extensive metallurgical work. What other de-risking work or engineering studies or anything else has to go into that before you're ready for the pre-feasibility study?
Well, we're actually have a lot of the work done that will be required for the pre-feasibility study as part of the permitting. So that study will actually be somewhat simplified in that the engineering firm that's awarded that contract will really be, the onus will be on them, obviously, to help with some optimization, but to verify the costing that we've already done, because we've been through the iterations of where the tailings should go, where the haulage roads should go, where the plant is best to be located with the government already as part of the permitting process. So those major infrastructure and major sort of ground disturbance parts are already set within the permitting process. So there won't be a lot of trade-off studies or anything like that required to see whether this goes here or whether this goes there. They're going to go where they're permitted. And we've already kind of done those iterations already. Just it's been done to the standards required by the country of Spain and the region of Andalusia, but they're not signed off at this point by a 43101 in qualified engineering firm, which is fine because that's not required by the government of Spain. That's a Canadian regulation process. And the standards are more or less the same. I mean, Spain is a first world country. You're not, nobody's going to permit you to go in there and just rip and tear. So we're pretty comfortable with the work that's being done already.
All right. So you've really got stuff moving on all fronts. You're still doing some exploration at Cura. You're also working on the pre-feasibility study, which will be out not too far into the future, and it'll wrap some economics around this project and give people a sense of just how beneficial, all these metals working together, and really all the metallurgical testing work that you've been doing over the last year will come into focus in a bigger way, and you'll get to see the economics on this project. We've also talked about how permitting is moving right along, and you've laid out the process there. Anything else you want to say about the IBW project before we move over to Aznalcóllar?
No, I think we've covered most of the key points that we're moving forward on. There are a number of other things that we're looking at, with respect to shipping concentrate, and we set up a foundation that we're going to use to participate in community development and development of a training center within the region and things like that. But from a shareholder perspective, I think we've covered the key things that look like they're going to be converted to dollars. But on the community front, we're also working very diligently to make sure that we are seen to be good corporate citizens and welcomed by the communities. And so far, the support is very good from the communities where we're working.
That's always important, too, to have that social license as well as the government backing. So I know it's a project of strategic importance to the government, but you want it to be important for the local stakeholders, too. So great point there, David. Well, let's move over to the news that you put out on March 3rd. And we had teased this for a long time leading up to it, that's when the commencement of the hearings would start in relation to the awarding of the Aznalcóllar public tender, the corruption charges that the government is reviewing. A lot of people are amped up about this because of how valuable this project could be and the fact that Emerita is really the only other bidder from that process 10 years ago. So walk us through anything you can tell us as far as an update here, David.
Okay. I mean, there's not a ton at this point. The first 2 days of the hearings were held March 3rd and 4th. A lot of that was sort of, I think, administrative oriented. But there were arguments put forth by certain of the parties, I guess, of the accused that have been heard before in appeals courts based on the feedback that we've received from our Spanish counsel. And so our counsel said basically that those 2 days went precisely as they would have expected, and there were no surprises. And now, later this month, the actual individual hearings related to sentencing and that sort of thing commence. There are 16 people implicated, so it's a bit of a lengthy process as a result. I think everybody has their days in court already scheduled. That information is public, so they know what day that they have to be at the courthouse, and it'll extend more or less to the end of June, I think. They're not there every day, obviously, and in some days it's only a few hours a day, sort of thing. But it's an extensive amount of court time because it's a very high-profile case. So at this stage, what has been explained to me in Spain, they don't proceed to this stage of the process unless there's very high certainty of conviction. So our lawyers feel very confident that, especially given that 5 Superior Court judges have written a resolution indicating that crimes have been committed. So it's unlikely that nobody is guilty of something. And of course, the implication of that is under Spanish law. If there's a crime committed in awarding a public tender, that bid must be disqualified and it must go to the next qualified bidder. Normally, I would say the next lowest qualified bidder, but we were actually, in my view, the highest bidder in this one. So, but as you pointed out, we were the only other qualified bidder in the process. So it's now, just a matter of letting the courts do their work, and we'll deal with the outcome. We have seen it before. So once the criminal case is resolved, the administrative court, which deals with the actual public tender part of it, not the crimes of corruption, will act. They have already done their work and telegraphed in writing that they concur with the findings of the criminal court. In other words, they concur with the fact that crimes were committed. It would be my interpretation of that. So in the case of IBW, we had a similar situation just with the administrative court. There was no criminal case there. But when the Superior Court finally did rule on that one, it was with very specific instructions, very, very specific timelines. And the government essentially was compelled and did follow the ruling of the courts. And we would expect the same thing. In that case, When they said that the public tender had to be overturned, they gave them 6 weeks to actually deliberate and follow the rules of the public tender process. And we knew at that time, in the case of IBW, there are a number of other bidders besides us, but we knew what the scoring system was, and fortunately, we were the next highest bidder when they did it properly. So the court system here, from all of our experiences, is completely independent, and they're not intimidated by any of the political things that go on. They have a very good track record of dealing with corruption cases. So we feel quite comfortable that justice will be served.
Well, we'll keep following along as updates come out. I appreciate you putting some color around what we know so far. And yeah, it is a process, but it's looking like the odds are in favor of the outcome here, maybe by the third quarter of this year, that the Aznalcóllar Project will be awarded to Emerita. We'll have to wait and see how it all shakes out, David, but fingers
Yeah.
crossed here on this end. And I appreciate you breaking down the key takeaways from the resource update here at IBW. That is the big news here on this one, and it's going to be exciting to see how this plays into the upcoming economic study, the PFS. Let's definitely get you back on when that comes out and break it down for everybody listening in. And I'm also going to put a couple images from this resource estimate underneath this interview. If you go over to our website, www.kereport.com, you'll be able to see that. Or you can also click on the press release itself. There's some good images that break down the different metals found in each of the three deposits and how the resources have grown from 2023 into 2025. So check out those images. I think they put a little visualization of just how well this resource upgrade went. And David, as always, looking forward to our next conversation.
Great. Thanks, Chad.